Hello and good evening. I'm Melissa Idris.
And I'm Sharad Kutan.
Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Our guest today is a former Member of Parliament for Pandan, Rafizi Ramli, who after a 4-year hiatus is making a return to active politics by contesting in the PKR party elections for the post of Deputy President, a race he lost to Azmin Ali in 2018. PKR leadership election will take place in May with nominations set for April. We welcome Rafizi to the show. Welcome, Rafizi.
I'm well.
So I want to begin with your return to active politics, starting with party politics. And I wanted to ask about where you see PKR now. Is the PKR of today, of 2022, different in terms of political strategy to the PKR of 2018 when you left for a hiatus?
Well, that's the beauty, and also that's something that, at the same time, something that we have to be concerned about, you know. The beauty is the whole ideological makeup of PKR stays the same. The bulk of the people who built PKR from what it was 24 years ago, they are still there. They remain committed to the ideals. But I think if we are not careful, we may be losing touch because after 2018, voters have become extremely sophisticated. If you compare the pre and post 2018, you know, we had to transition from a one-party dominant system that had been there for 60 years, where most of the voters felt that they had no choice. You know, it took a lot of efforts to convince voters then that democratic transition was possible. Now, 4 years later, we've had 3 prime ministers. We've had numerous elections at the state level, you know, by-elections. And whether politicians understand it or not, voters now feel really empowered. So PKR, for example, have to be careful that certain things that had endeared us to the public before may not work anymore. You know, sentimentality, you know, too much romanticism about how things were, about how we had stood up all these years. We are facing a bunch of voters who are very pragmatic and who feel that, look, you know, we know who is corrupt, we understand BN is not good, and we don't like UMNO, but we're not going to give a free ride to anyone. You have to prove that if we were to vote you in, you have a plan, you'll be very competent, and you will have immediate impact on our day-to-day life. So that requires a lot of change compared to how we went into 2018.
Right. I think we should come back to the question of the voter and the Malaysian, where they are. But I want to stay a little bit on the party, because the question really is, has PKR kind of moved on from the ghost of the Sheraton move? Has it overcome the deep divisions, you know, that movement demonstrated, the deep divisions that took someone like Azmin Ali and Zoraida Ibrahim, who are very senior members of the party, in a very different direction.
Well, I think it didn't take us long to recover. That's the bit that I said, that the beauty of it is the ideological makeup is the same. And if you look at the kind of people who left, you know, not all of those who were with Azmin Ali left. I think when they had to choose between personal friendship or political opportunities that, you know, Azmi may offer elsewhere, many of them decided to stay because I feel that, you know, the commitment to the ideals is there. What I think was slightly a hiccup from 2 years ago was trying to find out how do we get back to winning the public again? Because obviously after Sheraton move, there's a lot of anger, disillusionment, disappointment on the part of the public against PKR because it was more or less triggered by PKR, right? That's where I think the division,
Okay.
There's a line of division. You have a group of leaders who feel that the best way is to try to get back to Putrajaya as a government as soon as possible, and the quickest way of doing that is trying to get MPs either from UMNO or whatever party that is willing to come and give support to Datuk Seri Anwar or PH. That I think sort of delayed the party's efforts to really approach directly to the voters and energize
Well, that
them.
was Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim's strategy, wasn't that? That was his call, and it has failed in terms of political, internal party dynamics. It's failed in terms of electoral success, as we saw in the state elections of Malacca, Johor and Sarawak. Should Anwar step down?
I think it's, to be fair to Anwar, is to say that it's his personal strategy is also not true, because there was a lot of pressure from PH as well. This whole strategy of going back to Putrajaya immediately is not an Anwar Ibrahim strategy. It is a DAP strategy, is an Amanah strategy, is a PKR strategy, and is a Pakatan strategy as a whole. So, on the one hand, Anwar had to contend with the pressure from DAP, Amanah and PKR to try to get as many people to jump as possible. On the other end, if he does not deliver that, he also becomes, he will be the one to blame. So to say that it's purely Anwar, that's where I feel that it's unfair to just...
But should he take responsibility for
and let's
some?
look at something more recent, the decision for PKR to be in Pakatan but actually fly on its own flag in Johor, which yielded very little to PKR as a party. I mean, at some point, does the leader have to say that he has failed and that his failure is sufficient for him to move aside? Get the new people in, get new strategies, and retire. Why not?
When it comes to the logo, Sharat, right, I think it's very simplistic for any leaders to say that the result was because PKR used his own logo. There's no evidence whatsoever to suggest that. If anything, you see, Muda actually did worse if you compare apple to apple. Amanah didn't do better with using Pakatan logo. TAP also lost. That's why after the PRN Johor, looking at the data, at least I concluded that it's a lot deeper than just a question of Prime Minister candidate. It's about logo, it's about disunity. It's basically voters were disenfranchised with Pakatan as a whole, So to go back to your question now, Mshara, if Anwar is deemed as a failure, he should resign. I don't think it will yield any better result anyway. Because the real issue is not really about whether it's Anwar or whether it's PKR or it's Pakatan. Is really not understanding that the momentum moving towards 2018 was not personality politics. It was not Tun Mahathir. It was not really the strength of Pakatan. It was the public's resonance with the kind of issues that Pakatan was talking about. So it has to be a group effort. So I'm trying to tell everyone, including PKR, including Pakatan, so long as we continue with this preoccupation of who is so-called Prime Minister candidate or who is going to deliver what, we are not going to get the result. We have to go back to talking to the public, articulating what is important to them, and finally, really delivering some solutions. And I think if we do that, the question about Anwar or about Guan Eng or about logo is going to be quite secondary.
Okay, can I ask you then, if you put the personality politics aside and you talk about policy politics, has the failure of Pakatan and PKR specifically to push forward the policy as a differentiator for disenfranchised voters, is it because there was no shadow cabinet? Is it because that contributed to PH's underperformance? Could the possibility be you as PKR's number 2? Would you push for a shadow cabinet?
I will.
Before GE15?
Well, I don't know before GE15 because of the makeup, you know. But I think it is time to go for shadow cabinet. Okay. It's not just a question of policy. It's not just a question that is sexy. I think we have also to recalibrate with the public the expectation, if Pakatan were to go to power, what kind of minister we will have. Because riding into 2018 and then, you know, that 22 months, it was so easy to just harp on the fact that Najib was bad and Pakatan is good. Sometimes I think we took our eyes off to be objective about the performance of each individual minister. And when we do that, we set a lower standard. And the public basically follows all this. And it leads us to where we are today, where people feel that, you know what, there are good people in PH, there are good people in BN and PN, you know, but there are also very incompetent and bad people across.
I think we saw that demonstrated amply during the 22 months. I want to ask you this, because I don't believe that Malaysians are as sophisticated as you say they are. They, in the sense that it can't be just policy. Charisma is central. Anwar was the glue for Pakatan Rakyat, and then was the glue for Pakatan Harapan in many ways, right? He brought everybody together. He seems to fail to do that today. Are there replacements? You say you're coming back and you're talking about policy, but people look at you as a hero as well. There is a culture of projecting onto individuals like yourself.
I actually disagree. I disagree totally, Shara. And I think that's where politicians, especially in Pakatan, had failed miserably. Because all along, being in politics for too long, politicians at the top have this idea that if you, it's individual politics, is hero worshipping. That if you take this one person, you put him there, he will be able to bring the crowd. My take about what had progressed this country politically since '98 until now, it's not really about a person. Of course, you know, Anwar brought that emotional glue in the beginning. But the wave of support then in '98 that translated into 10 years later is basically what we inherited 10, 15, 20 years before from a group of voters who always wanted a different kind of a government than what UMNO had offered. I mean, of course, they didn't join any party, but they always wanted a slightly more progressive, more inclusive, parties that didn't really dumb down, you know. So there's always that number of voters who are ever ready to give you support, you know. So there is enough smart voters out there, and these numbers are getting bigger and bigger. So if leadership of Pakatan doesn't accept this, that's why we are relegated to third division now, because they want to see something a lot more beyond a person. And if you look at polls, right, not a single leader in this country now really command respect. When you ask, who do you want to be a prime minister in the next general election, and you name all the leadership, you know, the highest number for the last 6 months is about 60% plus, is basically people who say, can we have someone else? None of the above. So I think society moves so much faster than what the politicians think.
Okay, all right, Rafizi, we're going to take a quick break, but we'll come back and continue this conversation with former Pandan MP Rafizi Ramli in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned to consider this. We'll be right back. Hi, welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris. With me is Sharad Kutun. We are speaking tonight to Rafizi Ramli, former MP for Pandan. He is returning to active politics after a 4-year hiatus. Rafizi, let's talk a little bit about your apparent distaste for the big tent, big tent approach to politics, which has been advocated by parties like Warisan and Amanah and DAP. Why is this unpalatable to you, particularly as we're seeing new parties like Muda and Warisan come on board with the same type of reformist thinking?
Well, it has to be evidence-based, you know. I gave them the benefit of the doubt for, in the beginning, 5-6 months. We run polls all the time. There was no evidence whatsoever that, especially Warisan and Pejuang, gained traction. Muda had some traction, but it was very obvious from the very beginning. It was tapping into the disillusioned Pakatan Harapan supporters, not that it was bringing a new set of votes or support altogether. But when it was tested, especially in Johor, the result speaks for itself. That Warisan and Pejuang didn't have support at all. Muda basically drew the support from PH voters, and that's why when you go apple for apple, meaning that you compare a constituency with the same number of voters breakdown between Malays, Chinese and Indians, when you compare Muda's seats versus PKR and Amanah, PKR and Amanah actually did better than Muda. And even in Lakin, when there was a fight against PKR, it's quite obvious Muda basically lagged behind PKR. So the conclusion was very straightforward. Muda drew from the same crowd that had supported PH all along. Now, what is most revealing to us when it comes to Big Ten after Johor was that we actually ran a voter simulation with about 40,000 plus fence-sitters. They were modeled as fence-sitters based from mathematical modeling, and we call and survey them based on different scenarios. What we figured out was that majority of them had made up their mind 3 days before Johor election that between PH, PN and BN, majority of them would go to either PN, of course BN, you know. But, let me rephrase, you know. If they were allowed not to decide between choosing the 3 coalitions, 60% of them would say, you know, I don't like any of them. I don't want any of them, you know. But when we remove that option, that, okay, now you have to decide. You don't have the option not to answer, you have to decide. You see that 60% of that split their votes between BN and PN, not PH and PKR. So they have made up their mind that, come what may, I'm not going to vote for PKR or PH. So based on that, you know, and this is the concept of vote transferability, that 1 plus 1 is not equal to 2 when it comes to politics. So if you go by the simple logic that because PN has about 25%, if you combine with PH, you will get 50% plus. Chances are, based on that vote simulation exercise that we've done with 40,000 plus voters, is that if you remove PN altogether, or you make them equal to PKR or PH, those who had voted for PN may actually go and vote for BN.
I think there is a distinction between the way maybe the big tent is used in a North American scenario.
Yeah.
It means to political parties that have an ideological spread, right? So you can have a kind of the right of the Democratic Party and the left of the Democratic Party, for instance. Here we're talking specifically about coalition building, right?
Yeah.
And your argument is basically you can't total up all the antis to make into your side is the winning. So straight fights aren't necessarily going to win. So what then? What is it that PKR or Pakatan Harapan, if PKR still wants to play in this Pakatan Harapan mode, will be the winning thing? That will actually make sense for the voter, that they will come together in sufficient numbers.
We have to win back that 25% fence-sitters who had switched to PN. It's quite straightforward.
To PN,
To
Perikatan.
Perikatan. Because BN did not get extra vote. Whatever Najib thinks, UMNO thinks, they're not strong. Their support level stays more or less the same throughout the last 4 or 5 years. But we are talking about 3 or 4 corner fights, and therefore you only need about 38% votes to win a first past the post system. You know,
Are you talking about the Malay agenda? Because
No,
Perikatan is and has styled itself as a Malay party, right? Coalition, right? Bersatu is a Malay party. Is that where
I'm not sure.
PKR
No,
has to be?
I'm not. That's why it is very important to understand why those who had voted for Pakatan actually switched to Perikatan. It's not necessarily about Malay agenda alone. It is basically about wanting to move on with their daily life. You know, so some of them consider that when Tan Sri Muhyiddin took over as Prime Minister, life goes on. Some of them see, the fence-sitters didn't necessarily see Sheraton move as a betrayal. Only the hardcore Pakatan see it as a betrayal. Some of them see it as a continuation of life. So they are very pragmatic voters, and they are Malays, they are Chinese, they are Indians. They basically want to move on from 2018 and Sheraton and so on. So I think if we go back to their agenda, what matters to them, appealing to them, we may be able to swing 10, 15% away from PN back to Pakatan, because these voters used to vote for Pakatan. It's a lot easier to win them than try to convince those who had supported BN all along. So if we do that, with an additional 10% from Pakatan, you know, switching back from to Pakatan Harapan, we may be able to hit about 38, 39. And in a three-corner fight, then Pakatan has a chance to win quite a lot of seats. So that's a lot more palatable to do, a lot easier to do, and I think it relates more to the public than trying to stitch a coalition of people with political personalities that will not see eye to eye forever.
Are you saying that you can, in the short time that we have till the next general election is expected, that PKR is able to swing this 25% voters by talking policy as opposed to personality? Is that what you're saying? Can I get you to elaborate on how you want to win those 25%?
That's actually the biggest problem now. Time is of the essence. You're right. I think our experience was that it took about 1 year plus to swing, to really convince fence-sitters. 3 to 4 months sounds quite short. That one I agree. But at the same time, all was not lost because we had the goodwill of those who voted for us in 2018, who remember what it was. So I think it's a lot quicker to energize them now compared to before. That's why it has to start from the urban centers, from the moderate ones. They have to be part of the campaign. They have to convince themselves first, because from there you will see more positivity in the social media when they talk. When we move away from preoccupation about do we have enough numbers, who's going to be Prime Minister, to the what matters. And I think that kind of narratives being spread by individual Malaysians hopefully will make up for that 3 to 4 months time that we have. But we have to do it now, and we have to try.
Okay, very quickly, you're going into a party election. Are Malaysians going to be witness to more a slugfest, a kind of a bloodbath in PKR that often demoralizes people people who are both in the party and outside, when they see the party go at each other? And is that going to happen?
I haven't said a single thing or done any single comment, regardless of what people say about me. I've mentioned earlier that I'm very focused when I decide to do something. I decide to come back because I think I have a role to play when it comes to fence-sitters. I think the result of the party election is secondary to me, whatever happens. As best as possible, I can't control the rest, but I'm very focused about what I need to do in these 2, 3 to 4 months. So even if you provoke me, Shara, I don't think you will get much from me in the next 3 to 4
Very
months.
zen right now.
You can't
Okay.
control the rest.
I can't control the rest though.
Okay.
Rafizi,
Yeah.
thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Sure.
Appreciate your time. That's all we have for you on this episode of Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris.
And I'm Shiraz Putin, signing off for me.
Thank you so much for watching, and
And
good
good night.
night.